Hi, welcome everybody to today's ODI Fridays lunchtime lecture. I'm Hannah. I am the Digital Marketing Manager here at the ODI, and I'm really pleased to be welcoming Ian here from Spend Network. Spend Network, he's come in and sit down, launched the OpenOpps.
Yep.
Which year was it that you launched?
It was about 4 weeks ago.
4 weeks ago. Okay, that was quite recently. And you were part of the ODI Startup program.
Yep.
2013 to 14?
That's right. Yeah, actually up to 15. You were very generous to us.
Right.
We stayed for a while.
Excellent. So, as you can see, we're live streaming today. So if you'd like to join in the conversation on Twitter, please use hashtag ODI Fridays. Thank you for coming today, and I will now hand you over to Ian. Thank you.
Thank you. So I suppose I'd better start by kind of apologising for the appalling arrogance of this, the title of my slide deck. But it actually kind of matters that really I wanted to suggest in the slide deck that important things can be changed by opening up data. But also that really all you need is some bits of code to scrape the data that you need in order to open it up to actually start making changes. So I'm going to introduce basically, so we run two websites. This is the background for everyone. So we run spendnetwork.com and OpenOpps.com. Spendnetwork.com gathers up all of the spending data from around the UK and makes it freely available to anyone to access, to understand who spent what with whom. And that's on the left there. And basically you can put in Norfolk County Council, DWP, and see where their money went and how much they were spending in different categories over different years. OpenOpps.com is our new site, which is a global site that allows you to search for any tender opportunity in the world that we've managed to gather so far. We've got data from 80 countries, and it's growing. And basically, we publish everything. Actually, I can quickly, or not quickly, because my machine's running a bit slowly. Maybe not. We can gather data. We publish it in the Open Contracting Data Standard. So that means that the data is available for people to use to analyze for the purpose of whatever research they're doing. We're really interested in counter-corruption research or counter-fraud research, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about doing some of that work later on. OpenOpps is a business. They're both businesses. So although the data behind them is open, we sometimes expect people to pay to access certain facilities on the site in order to make, to sustain the work that we do around research and to be viable, to earn a living and all of those interesting things. So that's how they work. So if you want to use particular search tools on OpenOpps or you want to get more alerts, then you have to pay for it. I wanted to talk a little bit about why purchasing matters and why it has the potential to actually change lives. Because if I put up a slide, an invitation for everyone to come along and talk about how open data in procurement is important, I think I'd be staring at many fewer faces. It's a really dry subject and it's hard to get people to engage with. But public fraud really, really matters. There are basically three types of fraud in public sector. There's a sort of grand larceny type fraud that you see when someone actually takes a publicly owned asset and either takes it into their own ownership or sells it to someone else. You know, that sort of Ceausescu type style of, right, today I own this and you're going to give me all the money that comes from it. And that typically gets done by heads of state or families of heads of state. And it is, whilst it is in volume terms relatively rare, it is very impactful. Procurement fraud is really the largest area of fraud because it actually is about making an inflated purchase on behalf of an organization and extracting the surplus for your own gain. So you make an inflated purchase either through collusion but the problem with procurement fraud is that actually on the face of it, the person is acting legitimately, right? It's their job to make a purchase on behalf of this organization, whether it's buying a road or buying a taxi. The fact that it's an inflated purchase is the bit that's hard to find out. The other form of public fraud is outcomes bribery. There's a lot of this, and it's very small. Again, it's hard to tackle, but this is stuff like amending outcomes, like, okay, I'm going to let you off your parking ticket if you give me a bribe. But also, I'm going to amend our government policy to explicitly allow you to frack or whatever, but you will give me in return for money. So it's really large. The issue, it can be really large, that outcomes bribery. You know, judiciary is often where it happens. But the procurement fraud is where I'm going to talk about today. A media network estimate that 60 to 65, but let's go for 60% of public fraud centers on procurement. And there are reasons why that. It's easy. Unfortunately, it's pretty easy to do. Conversely, it's hard to detect in that the burden of proof, especially in Western societies where you have to get your public prosecutor to go to court for you, you have to have really strong information that there is a fraud occurring. But also, detection casts a shadow. So if I detect that there has been a fraud in a council in London, it is very likely that the head of finance, the head of the leader of the council, and many of the other staff will be considered unable to do their job, or their position could become untenable. So if you're losing, let's say, 50 grand to a collusive fraud in your planning department, is it better to know that that's happening or not? If it's only 50 grand, I'd rather not know, I think, is something that can really infect public institutions. You know, that feeling of like, look, but don't look too hard. Especially when looking is difficult to do. Unsurprisingly, there's a huge cost. Whoops. Sorry. This isn't going to work. Yeah. There we go. The cost of fraud, eventually, there we go. There is actually a significant cost to fraud. I think people are really attuned to this now. That the idea that you've got, okay, apart from the direct losses that you have from not being able to, you know, oh, we didn't get that road, so you spent, you know, 16 million on a road that never turned up. You've lost 16 million. But actually, there were also a whole lot of additional losses. I mean, it's linked to poor sanitation, transport, etc. So that form of corruption. But also, you end up with competitive losses. So good businesses won't tender, or good businesses have to become corrupt in order to tender, and so you end up with a dysfunctional market. Equally, there's a governance loss because you lose trust. Your own citizens lose trust in your capacity to deliver what you promise, and it can only be small amounts of corruption that can do this, because actually, once you get the press reporting corruption, you can really see a lack of trust appearing in government as a result. So there's a feeling that it has a particularly high cost. And actually the best way to tackle it is to prevent it. But the problem is, it isn't simple. I don't know if any of you have heard of Tom Gash. He used to work for the Institute for Government, has written a wonderful book called Criminal, which is about why people do bad things and about how we look at we tend to look in the wrong way at how to treat criminality. Either that people are that poverty is the cause of criminality, or that, for example, tougher sentencing will reduce criminality. What he's really the book shows is that it's about opportunism. If we don't think we're going to get caught, we're much more likely to do something criminal. But the really interesting thing around fraud in procurement is that the blurring of what is criminal and what is not is massive. So take, for example, a contract, let's say, for a software company. It might be a 12-year contract, and the day after that contract is signed, the person who let the tender goes to work for that supplier. Now, my gut reaction, I think all of our gut reaction would be, well, that actually, there's probably something illegal happened here, because there should be a level playing field. But actually, the employee probably had a duty of care under his employment contract to inform his employer when a conflict of interest appeared, but they may not have committed a fraud. It would be very, very hard in that instance to commit a fraud. So you're probably, if you wanted to investigate that, you could get the police to go and look at his home computer and do all of those sort of things. But the likely outcome is that you get to sack them, and probably you wouldn't even be able to affect their pension. So there's something broken in there, and we know it, but how do we do it? Our structures, our governance structures and our procurement laws sometimes make this worse. So we set up framework contracts where we limit the supply to 5 or 6 suppliers. That's really a mandate to cartelize your market, because now those suppliers, they know they're listed, they can sit down and say, okay, we're going to take it in turns to win bids, or are we going to inflate our bids in order to maintain a healthy profit? And you're going to bid not to win on these. Those frameworks that lock people in really can create that problem. And of course, selective transparency. We don't release enough data about what's going on in our contracts. That makes it much harder to understand whether there is crime. The lesson from Tom's book is that actually, if you appear to be monitoring, if you have an always-on presence and say, we are going to be looking at this routinely, you will likely dissuade people from conducting fraud, because they think the opportunity isn't there or the risk isn't worth it. And you take away that opportunism. I think the problem we have at the moment is that it is too easy to do it. And one of the other areas that opportunism is quite interesting is, where are we manipulating markets? So if I give pro bono work to a large consultancy, and I'm in one of the central government departments, that's seen as a good thing, right? So they're doing a whole load of work for me for free. Great. Government didn't pay. But actually, that in itself can swing the balance of the competitive nature of any tender that follows, because they get to shape the tender, quite possibly, but they also get to know exactly how to respond to the tender. You know, these guys don't do pro bono work for nothing, unfortunately. You know, pro bono means free, but it really, they're looking for something in return. So we need to be careful about this. I'm going to run through some stuff around how we can analyze data to try and solve these problems. It's not a perfect world yet, but there's lots of things that you can do to start flagging up issues. So I hope many of you have seen this before, the Spend Network teapot of finance data, or the OpenOpps teapot of finance data. What this does, what we're saying is that really we should be publishing transparently all of this data, but that it should be linked, right down to receipts. I know that's going to be a hard one to persuade people to do. But if you think about it, if I knew that a transaction for software came from a specific budget through a specific contract, through a specific tender, I would be able to really understand whether the software was delivering value for money, meeting its intended purpose, but more importantly, whether the competition for that software was genuine. Because if I can see it here and I only got, say, 2 bid responses, on another tender for the same software, there were 15 bid responses, you can start to wonder, well, what's going on with that tender that really only elicited 2 bid responses? So we can start to begin to understand what competition should look like. And the important thing is knowing who bought what from whom. We're still struggling in this country. We don't have a formal register of government entities. I know anyone who's met me knows that I'm particularly boring on this subject, but I mean, really, come on, guys. Why can we not know what government constitutes? It would make a lot of what we do around understanding who does what in government really important. Really important stuff, make it so much easier. So we can do transaction analysis. Now, at the basic level, that's like, okay, have you got any duplicate invoices this month? You know, invoice fraud is a real thing. People send in duplicate invoices in the hope that they're going to get paid twice, or they send false, invalid invoices. So people who send in invoices, the old scam was that you would send in invoices for advertising, and the person receiving them go, well, I didn't advertise on anything. And then they get really threatening letters. So they think, oh, actually, I better just pay it. It's not that much. It's 300 quid. And then they just do it more and more and more. And then say, right, we're going to take you to court and scare people. But actually, you know, payments to suppliers that can't be identified, unknown suppliers, missing approvals, all of these things can indicate fraud. Contract and value for money compliance. Exceeding contract values or payments outside of normal value for money expectations. There is a law, the EU law, which still applies for the moment, stipulates that if your contract increases by the original estimate by 10%, then you're required to either recompete or to send an amendment through. And you should have that approved. The interesting thing is that only 30% of the original tenders have contract award notices in the European portals. And of those, only 5% have values attached to them. So if you inflate your value by 10%, who would know? Especially if you didn't publish a contract award notice, and if that contract award notice didn't have a value on it, who would know, right? So and this is where our systems are broken, because we create incentives to not report by doing that. And actually, Slovakia have got a really interesting law that says if you don't publish your contract award notice, your contract is invalid. And I think that's probably an approach that more people should take. We can do stuff like supplier profiling. So actually, does the businessman who owns the supplier have any correlation to your HR list? Or businesswoman, whatever. But I did some work right at the start of my career looking at an NHS trust, and we discovered that one of their suppliers seemed a bit expensive. So we talked to the buyer and said, are you sure these are the right products you're buying? He said, yeah, they're the best company I've ever found. They're amazing. So we thought, well, can't understand it. We decided to give the supplier a call, and it turned out to be the buyer's home number. So it wasn't a particularly sophisticated fraud. And when we went round there, his garage was full of the products that he was selling back to himself. So, you know, those sort of things can happen. We can test other things, like, okay, this supplier only has a registered address that's a PO box. Or they have a registered address where it's very high density. There is sort of like 100 businesses registered to this address. Okay. Or perhaps they don't have any other clients in the public sector. That's a really strong indicator. So if they only trade with one entity, there's a really strong indicator there that actually there's something going on. Now, you have to have other indicators as well, but and then supply risk profiling, just stuff like credit risk, geopolitical risk, performance risk. Are they submitting their company house stuff? all of this makes a difference. And when you can build a picture of what the relationship looks like. Whoops, I'm going to go too far. Yeah, I knew that was going to happen. There we go. Are your tenders competitive? There's a really, the Procurement 101 says, if you're going to buy light bulbs, say, I want a light bulb with this wattage, this arc of light, for it to last at least 30 months or whatever, street lamps, right? They have this brightness, this arc, whatever. You don't put in your tender, I need Osram bulbs, because then you limit your supply options. But of course, if you are intending to manipulate a tender so that you get the best results out of it, so that you're achieving your chosen supplier that you have a collaboration with, then actually that's exactly what you're going to do. So can we analyze tender text to try the specifications to try and see the commonality between tenders that receive fewer bids and tenders that receive more bids? And then competitive responses. So bid responses, the metadata. So are they coming from the same IP address? Is there collusion going on? It's a really interesting example that the CMA found was that some people have been submitting tender responses to their tender portal from the, like 2 minutes apart from the same IP address. I think that's suspicious. And then the viability of the bidders or the similarity of the bid responses. If you're not going to win, would you just throw stuff in the same as last time and just change the names? Tender patterns, who wins what and when, correlation with employee records. So is this supplier following this buyer wherever they go? This training company, he was in planning and we use this training company, and now he's in social care and we're using this training company. Is there anything in that? Contract analysis is the stuff around where your transaction's going. Are we overspending? Are they supplying rebates? And are we getting failures? Collusion that's the one that really happens, I think, is where we've seen, certainly in the NHS, we've seen a couple of examples recently, a training company, and they had this rather complex web of money going through 3 companies, but it was a training hospital a teaching hospital in the north of England, and the procurement manager was basically funneling money back to himself and the owner of this training company, and they managed to get through something over £100,000 in 3 years, and no one thought to look. But actually, they would have seen very clear relationships with the buyer that existed outside of work. They would have had there were very uncompetitive tenders, so the relationship with the losers, they were having to get new people in every time they issued a tender to really say, oh, bad luck, you never won, even though they had no intention of winning. And there was no value for money. Comparatively, compared to everyone else in doing training, they were spending 3-4 times more. Cartels, very hard to detect, but again, that's about suspicious pricing patterns and bidding patterns and documents. I could go on for too long about that. The one thing I will say, and this is the important bit around gathering metadata, gathering a wide set of data, is that you need comprehensive and consistent analysis. I can't compare, what is the right number of bids for, a piece of software, piece of CRM software, if I haven't got a history of seeing those bids coming up in my territory. So we need that long-term consistent data that is transparent and available to be able to say, oh, we're seeing an average of 6 bids for CRM on everything. Why did you only get 1 bid? Our data sources, there's so much inconsistency. So the valuations of contracts, no one ever stipulates whether they include VAT or not. Right, now some supply doesn't include VAT, so you could have understand why would it? But actually, unless you're explicit in your metadata about what your valuation is, we get a swing of 20% either way. That makes it very hard to understand what value for money looks like, because one person's quoting, oh, well, it's a £16 million contract, that includes VAT, and then there's someone else is quoting a £16 million contract, and that excludes VAT. So we need that consistency. And data sharing within government, so some of the data you need to do this stuff is like bid responses or HR data, but you need it across multiple sites in order to understand what the norm is. And I perhaps shouldn't have been surprised, but I was, at how unwilling government is to share its data with other bits of government. There are problems around FOI and the fear that once you give your data to a third party, then they're subject to FOI, and are you going to get in trouble with your suppliers? But it is important, and we don't have enough on data sharing. We also don't have enough on baselines. Whoops, sorry. I'm going to carry on. Just sorry about this. We don't actually have enough on baseline, so we don't know what like-for-like analysis is. That VAT is an example, but you need to be able to assess, okay, this person and this person are actually comparative. We can compare what they're doing, and that comes back to identifiers, other things like that. But the other thing is that our scoring needs to be cumulative. So if someone's doing one thing wrong, let's say they only trade with one public sector entity. That's not enough. We need to know that they've got a PO box, that they are less value for money, that there was only one bid in the tender when they won it, or that they're just sitting suspiciously underneath the threshold. Those are the kind of things that need to be analyzed to be able to understand and say, right, okay, that's what you need to look at. And until we do that, we don't get the persuasion element that says you're being watched when you are procuring, and that will put off people intent on corrupting the process. And most of all, it's that give me your metadata. I want your metadata, which is the basic stuff around actually what was this? What is this piece of data? Where does it come from? When was it released? What does it represent? Too often we get stuff that purports to be a tender, but it's not. It's a prior information notice. We get data that purports to be one thing, so spending that actually isn't a transaction, it's a transfer. There's a lot of problems. So that's what we need for ongoing monitoring. We're on our journey of implementing the teapot, and we hope that transparency is really what's going to deliver it. But we've got challenges. One of the challenges is we need to use closed data and open data. We don't expect people's HR data to be opened. That would be wrong. We know that, but it's a useful tool for analyzing corruption. So how do we need those restrictions on some pieces of data and openness on others? And we haven't got there yet. And we need business rules that allow us to analyze this data. However, the prize is a great one. So we've been featured in all of these places, so that's my social proof for you. But I would just say that the prize is a great one, and OpenOpps is a really exciting opportunity to start understanding what we're doing globally. It is a market of somewhere around between $9 and $11 trillion a year that government spends, and they do that with something around 1.5 million companies. And that's actually a scarily small number. If you think about that 11 trillion, 9, let's say 9 trillion. It's only going to 1 million companies. That's a scarily small number, and it has the capacity to change the lives of so many more people. Encouraging more smaller companies into the government supply chain is only going to happen if we have a transparent and genuinely competitive process and well-functioning government markets. So thank you for listening to my spiel. Any questions? Fantastic. I was getting worried. No, we need it for the...
Maybe I missed this, but how many data sources do you extract data from in 80 countries?
So we're building more data sources every day. I think we've got about, I haven't checked, but I think it's about 600 at the moment. Most of those are from, you know, in terms of sort of by volume, the UK has, we have to gather data from over 200 sources in the UK because it's a very fragmented market. Others are a bit better. But I mean, you know, we only gather from one data source in the US at the moment, and there are about 1,000. So you know, this is a lifetime's work, really. Hi. Work it out amongst yourselves.
Yeah, what's the ideal? Is the ideal to have all contracts and all that data inputted into one place?
Fundamentally, yes. I mean, you know, the problem is, so we gathered what we can in the form of tenders, and we're going to keep gathering that. If you then gather the contract data, you can then turn around and go, well, whoa, what's missing here? So in the UK, Contracts Finder, just on Contracts Finder, about 40% of the contract award data is missing. Now, when we get round to going, well, who's the one that don't award the contract, or don't put the contract awards up the most, we'd be able to rank it and say, look, oh, well, these are the naughty, you're in the naughty corner. But actually that's really important, because then once we got that, you can do things like build pipelines and say these tenders are coming up in the next, 15 months. And we can encourage that. That creates more competition in and of itself. So yeah, just to collect all the data is the start, but then to analyze it and really to share it with other people. So we're talking to the University of Sussex and to the University of Salford, both of whom, and Portsmouth, all of whom have got corruption and counter-fraud programs. And it's like, we want to make that data available to researchers so they can do the best they can with it.
Oh, hi.
Hi.
Sorry, a couple of disparate questions. I worked for the EU in the 1980s, so I'm used to the official journal, and actually I was one of the people that put the official journal into a large database, which kind of still exists. So I'm kind of wondering about data formats. Is that one of the last things I did, because I tend to be a bit of a gadfly, is I took the whole of Tower Hamlets spending data for a year, which annoyed them intensely, and incidentally, that was via FOI. When I finally got it, I found that I had CSV, I had XML, I didn't have any JSON at that time, but basically I had a whole bunch of disparate stuff, which is something that actually also I think Open Knowledge Foundation encountered. So I'll actually leave this question there because I'm taking up too much time. So I'm wondering about how you're dealing with that, because you've got a lot of different things potentially in there.
So we have a mechanism that we go and scrape the location of the files, and then when we scrape the files down to our servers, and then we have to manually check every file, because a lot of them have blind headers, and the worst of all, totals. Yeah, Total is a real problem because it's also a French petroleum company. So you can't say, oh, okay, we're going to eliminate anything that says Total, right? But we want to eliminate something called Total. So we have those problems, but basically the different data formats, we just try and have to cope with it. It involves manual work. There's no way around it. So when we've done what? 11,000 CSV files now. We do have quite a clever algorithm, so I say it myself, that matches the headers, when we do find the headers, it matches the headers using a range of fuzzy matching and machine learning tools to say, oh, that looks like a header that I've seen before, and therefore that goes into this column because we've previously mapped this into that column.
Yeah, so actually, since all these governments are anxious to show that they're white as snow, there could be actually a huge standardization effort there. Not that that'll ever happen.
Do you know what?
I think pigs will fly first.
Yeah, exactly. But I would rather not. So one of the things that I see happening is that people stop publishing data because they go, oh, it's got to be perfect, you know. And we would much rather they wrote it on the side of a cow and left it in a field where we could. But you know, it's better that than not being open at all. Sure. So I tend to soft pedal on data formats. It would be nice if people could do it, but I think it's unrealistic. But also it prevents publication very often. So it'd be better for us to. The one thing I have learned is that if there's no incentive within for publishing the data, so contract awards is a really good example. There's no real incentive for publishing that data. We have yet to come up with a mechanism for making people do it, and we're supposed to be the best at this, and we're still not able to do it. So I think something around ICO, FOI being accelerated for these sort of data sets that are pre-approved would be useful.
Thank you.
Hi, Ian.
Hi, Mark.
I'm wondering what the feedback is sort of from the marketplace to OpenOpps, and whether you've identified certain categories of potential kind of client. I mean, one I can think of is, I imagine media type organizations might be interested in, say, procurement that goes to companies that actually are registered in tax havens and offshore trusts, because it would be useful to understand just how much public money is spent on companies that don't pay tax properly in the countries where they receive those commissions. So they might be a certain kind of client for you for specific pieces of work. But what is the emerging kind of profile of the kind of user base for OpenOpps?
So for OpenOpps, there's all the people who need to find out about tenders. So that 1.5 million companies, would be nice if we had that many clients, but I fear that's not going to happen. But you know, that sort of, look, I just need to find out what's going on. So that's the core user base, and then we've got both government and I would say organisations that are interested in understanding the competitive nature of public markets. So that might be policy institutions, or it might be networks like a media. We're certainly talking to them. I think that it's sort of early days yet. We only launched 5 weeks ago. So we're having conversations around that. It's interesting to understand, I think, how effective procurement markets are, and we're feeling aware around that. Government's also interested because they need to understand, well, actually, why does this contract go to a small business but this contract not go to a small business? And it has to be more than, okay, well, that contract was worth 160 million and that was worth 16 grand. Okay, we know all of that. But why if I've got 3 contracts for 16 grand, are some of them not going to small businesses? What's happening?
I was just interested if you could give an example of like international fraud and how you think OpenOpps would help that. Like not on a UK level, but say in a development context.
So I think the idea behind OpenOpps is to make the data available. That's the primary, so to give it to people so that they can research it. But let's take the European data, and one of the problems we have is varying data quality and inconsistency. But by making the data available on number of bids received, we could start to, anyone once that data is in a database, you can pretty quickly start running SQL queries on different categories of contracts and identifying ones that have unexpectedly low numbers of bidders. one bid or those sort of things. Now, I know there are other researchers doing this as well, but what we're trying to do is we're just trying to provide it all in a standard. So when that data if we start getting that data from beyond Europe and we start getting it from places like Africa, then actually, and the Middle East, you might start to see patterns emerging of particular tenders. Another area that we're looking at we're putting a proposal together for a government is to understand where their contracting is occurring. So if I've got a spread of 60 categories, where are they contracting most and where are they contracting least? Because every local authority should be buying fuel, but they know that some of them just aren't buying any, they're not tendering for fuel at all because it's all kind of black market activity. So by spotting where they're not going to tender and where they're not publishing contract awards, we can start to indicate where to look further. But it's fairly, we would love more data and then we can do more sophisticated things. Does that answer your question? I'm not sure. It does, does it?
Yeah, I was just looking for a specific example, but it's probably harder than
I mean, I have to be careful here because, but I know of a specific example in Africa where tender data, not OpenOpps data, but tender data is being used to identify where a particular agency are choosing to move money out illegally. So the fact that the tenders are structured in such a way that only one company can win it is being used. But I can't tell you any more than that, I'm afraid. So that makes me sound a bit sort of like, oh, secret squirrel, but it's just, I can't say anything. James.
Thank you. It's always good to be reminded that we're still not great at this stuff. So.
Well, I don't mean that wasn't.
Well, no, we're not.
Yeah.
We're not. So let's be honest. So I picked a fight earlier this week with a fellow civil servant who I think needs taking down. Have you got documented examples where senior civil servants are in collusion with suppliers that have been effectively taken out of office?
So the civil servant has been taken out of office. Yeah, you can just Google it. There are people who have gone to jail for colluding with suppliers. There was a case, I think it was 2002, Kent County Council, so not a civil servant, but Kent County Council. The guy, they had a program called the Kent Laser program, which was a collaboration between loads of authorities. And what they were doing was they were buying energy. So they went to this one supplier who was doing the mark-to-market every day to find the best energy prices and providing energy for, I think it was 12 or 13 local authorities. So they were all getting prices, by the hour, and they were getting their good prices. There was a rebate payment that was going back to Kent for the volume of the business. And that was supposed to be divvied up amongst all of the councils. And this guy was putting it directly into his own bank account, which is how they caught him. But yeah, he was sitting on sort of like 1.5 million. But his problem was that having started taking all of the money, he couldn't put it back, right? Because everyone was going to say, well, where were all our historical payments? What he should have done was only taken a small amount of it, and no one would have known. I'm not trying to, but there are good examples. So there was an NHS one with a training. There's lots of examples. Just Google it.
Can I ask what the relationship is with the Crown Commercial Service, or whatever it's called now, if it has changed its name?
Relationship.
Is there a relationship with the Crown Commercial
between
Service?
us and the Crown Commercial Service? Not at the moment, no. I mean, we have been. I was in a meeting with them actually the day before yesterday. Very lovely team working on small business, and they're good and they're working hard. But I think they have a hard road ahead of them. But yeah, there are some people who are doing good work at the Crown Commercial Service. Some I would think they should do more to be transparent, but but we don't have a commercial relationship with them at the moment.
It's just a lot of the vocabulary that you have used. I have heard them use the same vocabulary over the years, like, purchasing energy, things like that.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of commonality here. That's why it was just a recognition.
Yeah, no one wakes up on their 11th birthday and says, I want to be a procurement professional. but it happened to me, and I'm going to make the best of this, and I'll try not to use too many of the terminologies that are very procurement-y. But yes, there is a lot of synergy between our work and what they do. We would love for them to talk to us more, but we've got to win tenders and do things like that. Did anyone else have their hand up? Well, should we, Hannah? Yeah. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you for asking good questions as well. I was worried that it was going to be a bit Bill Hicks for a moment, but thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ian. We're back on the 2nd of September. We're taking a little break over the summer for ODI Fridays. Thanks everyone for coming, and please join me in thanking Ian.